Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast, brought to you by Drumforge. Drumforge is a forward-thinking developer of audio tools and software for musicians and producers alike, founded on the idea that great drum sounds should be obtainable for everyone. We focus on your originality. Drumforge, it's your sound. And now your host, EYAL Levy.
Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast. I am EYAL Levy, and I'm going to apologize in advance for my recording quality. I am in a hotel. My podcasting microphone is broken, and I figured that we should do this podcast anyways because my guest and I have been trying to get together for maybe a month and a half now, and it just kept on getting pushed back and kept on getting pushed back, and I really wanted to talk to him because we don't get to talk to people who work in this genre too much, and it's the genre I come from. I really wanted to do it, and like I said, just kept getting pushed back, and this time worked for the two of us, so here we are. We figured that you guys would prefer to have a podcast than no podcast, so I'd like to welcome Mr. Kristian Kohle to the podcast. Hello, sir.
Hello, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for being here. If you don't know who he is a German-Swedish musician, composer, music producer. He's known for working with a number of great bands like Aborted, Crematory, Powerwolf, Eskimo Callboy, and he's a primary writer and instrumentalist in his solo project, Another Perfect Day, when she tracks everything except for drums for himself. He was nominated for Best Metal Production at the Danish Metal Awards in 2009 for his work on the Burnings record Reawakening, and just in general knows how to make some nasty sounding productions. So welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for those kind words, and I'm very glad to be here. And honestly, before you got in touch with me, I wasn't aware of this format and this podcast, but of course, since then, I've been checking out quite a few episodes. Don't want to be too charming, but it's awesome, and it's really cool to see, especially that in these days where everything is compressed into 30 seconds Instagram videos, that you guys leave some space for details, and that's just great. So I kept on listening. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. And I gotta say, man, that I think that there's some wisdom to what you're saying, in that everything being compressed into bite-sized segments these days. I think that was kind of the thinking for years and years on how you have to do things to keep up with modern people's attention spans.
Yes.
But I think that modern people are getting sick of being spoon-fed superficial garbage, and they're thirsty or starving for real content and real information. And so we figured that we were going to give them a real show with where you try to get as deep as possible with the people you're talking to. And, in reality, my longest episodes on this have been the most popular ones.
Really?
So,
okay.
Yeah. So I think that things are starting to change because, I don't know, most people I know, and I know that people I know aren't a good sample for the whole population, but most people I know are starting to get sick and tired of everything in 3 minutes or whatever. So let me ask you a question. Why did you get started in music production?
Oh my God. I think that's the most typical or boring story, kind of, because I was just one of the typical guy playing in a band. I'm a guitar player, and started doing demos at other studios, and figure out I loved studio work. I loved capturing the moment and getting into details. That's what I liked, and what I preferred compared to the energy of a live show. And then I bought my first 4-track, and then I bought my first ADAT and an analog console, and then I bought the next one, and then people showed up saying like from the next rehearsal room saying like, hey, we have $300. Can you Deutschmarks? Can you record us? And I went like, cool. That means I can finally buy a Behringer compressor. Yeah, and that's how it went forward. And after a few years, I had that moment when I realized, hey, I have become much more of a producer than a musician myself, which was kind of scary back then.
Was this a good moment, or
I don't know? It was
oh fuck.
It was kind of mixed because I really didn't expect it, but since then I have always been someone who preferred working like creatively with people. I'm not a tech nerd. I mean, I have all the gear I need and stuff, but I don't know. I care more about, I don't know, making arrangements for a chorus to make it, sound awesome than to discuss about the difference of mic breeze or something, which I can do as well, but I was always trying to stay a musician and to actually understand the band musically. And then that usually leads to understanding them sonically, if you know what I mean. Like,
you were telling me that even with some of the most brutal bands that you work with, you try to take an actual producer approach rather than just engineer. And it's important for people who aren't familiar with extreme metal to know that in general, extreme metal bands don't look for producers.
Right.
In general, they just look for someone who can record them properly, because it's such an intense style of music. They generally have everything worked out in advance, exactly the way they want it. Yeah, they just go to the studio. So, but you actually produce these bands.
I mean, I do that as well. It's always like a matter of what people want me to do, of course. But I can't really understand why death metal shouldn't be produced, So, of course, it's much more complicated because death metal is one of the few like subgenres of metal where people usually don't write like heavy pop songs. So, which is totally fine, by the way. So you have like a complicated structure. You can't just listen to a song and say like, okay, let's copy the chorus twice, and and it's very complicated. So you really have to get into the material, and that's just, I think there's just no tradition of this because it was, I don't know, too complicated for producers, and bands are not used to do it. But that's what I'm trying to do, and for example, I'm doing that with Aborted right now. They have started writing their new album. I don't know when this will come out, but they're sending me demos, and I get back to them with like detailed suggestions. Like just from a different perspective.
Like this riff goes too long. This riff goes too short.
Like
this is great. What kind of stuff?
Anything. I could say this riff is too short. I could say like. This is too much of the same chord progressions, or I wouldn't use a blast here, do something else, or these are the strong moments of the songs, concentrate on them. And we just started doing this, but they're actually digging my comments, and it's totally up to them to decide if they go for it or not, but it gives them like another perspective. And if you want to do it properly, because the music is more complicated than other styles of music, you have to start early. That's, if you just, start tracking without having heard anything, this is not, you can do something, but this is like the proper way, that people send you demos, you get in touch with them and you try to instruct them, and then you're familiar with the songs and they have, they know you. But this actually mostly only works after having worked together with death metal bands. So you need to do like one album the old school way and make suggestions there, so they trust you, and or start trusting you. And then certainly usually after one or two albums, you reach a point where they go like, hey, yeah, we trust this guy. And for example, with Benighted, another extreme death metal band I work with, we have done quite a few albums, and we have some kind of blind understanding. And like the singer, he just told me recently, he said like, a lot of your suggestions sound weird to me, but I know you long enough that I'll try them anyway. And most of the time they work, Sometimes they don't work, of course. So if you have that relationship with a band, that's like a perfect base to make better albums. And
so when you work with a band for the first time, what steps do you take to gain their trust so that you can make suggestions in the first place?
I mean, I'm highly concentrated like all the time. So I'm really trying to, even when I worked the first time with Aborted, I haven't seen those guys before. They just showed up here for their Termination Redux EP like 2 years ago or something. And we hadn't met before. They showed up in the morning, we started recording. But from the first moment on, I'm trying to understand, who are the guys, how do they work, what do they want? And as soon as possible, I like slowly and try to make suggestions, and then you have to see how they react, because you have to read people, because some people are just not open for this, which is fine. And and the more you do, then the relationship kind of grows.
How do you deal with it when you really think that a band needs to, is really doing something stupid for the song, but they just don't want to take your suggestion, but you haven't established yourself with them yet? Like, you're not at the same point as you are with Aborted. Like, say they're a new band.
I mean, that's
and you just know that this part is fucking stupid.
Yeah,
I mean, that's got to change it.
In the end, it's their problem, And I'm always saying, like, it's the band that decides, in the end. So I'm not forcing anyone to do something. But usually, with most, and there are some people who are just not open for this. They worked on something for half a year, and talked about every fucking snare drum and every hit and and every chord. And then I show up and listen to it twice and say like, hey, why should we go for a double bass part here? Because it goes like that. And they go like, oh my, they're just not too much for them. And that's how it is. If they're not, I'm trying hard, but if they're not, if they haven't reached the point, it makes no sense, to force them. It's their album in the end. But most of the time, it's within the first 2 or 3 days, I can figure out, how far I can go, and then I go to that point. And sometimes it's also like different people in the band, like the drummer might be very open, and then the guitar player is like totally blocked or something. And but usually it's just, you gain trust, you slowly gain trust, and then it's getting better and better.
Do most of your first time clients already know your previous work?
Yes, all of them.
So does that help with the trust?
Of course. I mean, that's very different compared to the beginning, where I had to convince people to come here, and they didn't actually know why, or if sometimes like a record company or a management or something sends people here, I always want to make sure they know why they show up, why they show up. I want them to listen to my stuff, to tell me what they want. I want to, even if we're not working creatively, you need some kind of vision, some kind of, vision is a good word, for a production. Otherwise,
vision's a great word. We actually just put out a course called Speed Mixing, and defining your vision. We say that defining your vision is the most important thing you could do in a mix.
Yes.
Like, out of the first things, there's a million things you can do, million directions you could take, but the first thing you should always do is define what your vision is.
Yes, I agree. I mean,
because that determines everything.
There's also something I would call like instinct, which sometimes helps if you have gained like a certain maturity or experience, because you are not always sure of what you're doing, and I'm not always sure of what I'm doing, So sometimes you have to rely on that instinct. But I totally agree. That's what I'm trying to do all the time, is to come up with ideas, either like musically or sonically, present that to the band, see if it matches or not. And then sometimes you have people with an own vision, and then you have to, and that's cool. But you also have people who just come here and say like, I like your work. Can you make us sound awesome? And then I ask them like, what do you want? And they said like, just make it sound great.
Just make it awesome. Well, one thing I should also add is that rarely in my life does the initial vision and the final product match. So I feel like you define a vision so that you start going down a good path. But then once you're on the path, you need to let your instinct guide you.
Exactly.
Because if you stick too much to the original plan,
Yes.
you might be turning down really good ideas. So I feel like you start with the vision, but then you let instincts take over. And if you've worked hard and you have good tastes and good instincts, they'll get you to where you need to get. And oftentimes, the final result
It's something else.
is the vision plus a bunch of other things that you couldn't have understood before you started the project.
I agree, but still, I think with most of my stuff, if like me and the band, if we agree, that that this is the way to go, and everybody goes like, yeah, great idea, let's try that. Of course, you have to adapt, and it's gonna change over the production. But most of the time, if everybody thinks like, yeah, that's a great idea, my experience is it mostly works, and I don't know, this makes the production kind of inspiring, and also prevents you from repeating yourself too much. If you just come up, for example, that's what I did with Benighted, because we have been doing, I think we've been doing like 2 albums. We just did the latest album called Necrobreed, and I did like 2 albums before, and I still say they sound like cool, modern, brutal metal productions, and I really like them. But then
with really cool videos.
Yes, but then we reached a point where I said like, we can do the same thing again. It might be 3% better, but I don't think I can do it like 30% better. So it's gonna be boring. Could we? And I have a few ideas. Could we perhaps change it? And then see how they react. And then if you come up with something new, a new idea, from the get go, that especially if you have worked with people several times, it keeps your work like interesting, and also like with this Benighted, the new Benighted production, it totally worked. I was surprised, and even the reviews, people like really understood what we were trying to do, and that's just awesome if that works,
So what's the 30% that was different?
No, I mean I wasn't able to make it like 30% better, just say like, we do the same thing again, but this time, I don't know, I will dial in like an even better guitar tone. I just felt like what we had to say back then, that kind of sound, that's kind of done, and it sounds great.
Yeah,
now I can change.
You did it.
I can change some details, but it's boring. So I came up. I told them like first I thought like Vision for Benighted, for example, was like, they have like very disturbing parts, so like they like to surprise people. So with you hear something, go like, what the fuck was, that's what they do. And I said we should concentrate on doing as much as possible, like as doing things as fucking disturbingly as possible. And on the other hand, they have some really catchy parts. And I said like, let's try, especially on the vocals, to get as many, I don't know, sing-along choruses, on that album, surrounded by those disturbing parts. Let's see how that works. And let's go sonically, let's go for a more old school 90s HM2 guitar sound that may sound thinner, which it does, by the way, thinner and not as good actually as the latest album, the albums before, but which, I don't know, has a new character, that might make things more interesting. And that's what I suggested, and they went like, "Hey, cool idea, let's go for it." So, and that's what we did, and that worked, and that was cool to see that people actually, understood this, when they were listening to the album, and it actually sounds, especially the guitar sound is actually on a pure like hi-fi kind of thinking, is a lot worse than the albums before, but it has a character that just supports, the energy we were trying to get, and that's what I.
So technically speaking, what did you do on the first time around, guitar wise? What was in the rig?
I think we always used an old 2-channel rectifier, and I mean it was always like different mics and stuff and details there, but we used a rectifier, and that was always like the Benighted sound. Did 2 tracks, and then we did another pair of rhythm tracks with let me like a more shitty sound, that is just mixed in some kind of HM2-ish thingy there, just for the in there. But that was like 20%. So I said like, can we like turn that around, but don't make like a traditional HM2 tone because that's too shitty for us, and we need all the details. So let's just find something. I don't know. I wasn't sure if that would work. Let's find something that has that grindy, those grindy mids, those HM2 mids, but is still, I don't know, defined enough and heavy enough, and not just on the palm roots like a farty mess, and so I came up with some pedals, and they came up with some pedals, and we combined them with shitloads of amps that I have here, and campered some stuff and tried again. And I think it was some kind of custom-made French pedal that I had never seen before. I think it was a bass.
So when you say HM2-ish, you don't actually mean an HM2. You kind of went for something that was
yes
the same kind of feel, but
I always dreamt of something that has that grindy mid-range, that buzzsaw kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I never, I don't know, the HM2, all knobs crank kind of thing never worked for me as a main guitar. It was always too shitty for me. I don't know, perhaps I'm just not capable of doing it, or too stupid, whatever. And it shouldn't sound like Dismember or Entomb, but it should have that character, but more defined. And that was the idea, to find something. I still should order that pedal in France.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Do you remember what it was called?
No, not really, but I can ask the Benighted guys. And then we tried, and we just said like, okay, if it doesn't work, then we go back to our rectifier setup and just make it like a modern guitar tone. That's easy, more or less. And but it at least for us, it worked, and has a more grindcore-ish, dirty feel to it without sounding like lo-fi or anything.
So that was risky, actually, to go for a guitar sound that maybe technically is shittier than the one you made before.
Yeah, but if you had asked me, or if someone had presented that idea to me like 2 albums before, I wouldn't have done it, because we like both Benighted, they were like growing, getting more popular, and I was also like getting better and better, and we both felt like, hey, we don't have to prove anyone that we can do it the right way, So we've done that. So let's do something else. But I didn't have that maturity before to just say like, hey, it might sound a bit fucked up, but it has the right character, and let's just do it. And that's what I'm trying to do more and more,
So this kind of freedom to experiment and bring out unique tones, this is more of a recent thing across all your productions, or is this what you naturally start doing once you've made a few records with people?
Yeah, it was kind of growing, but it's like I think I would say after you have done like a few records that people like, and that have sold well and stuff, then you just gain a certain self-confidence, that you say like, I can do something else now, and people people won't just listen to it and say like, hey, what's that shit, but they will say like, oh, they might have meant something, and then that, what do you call it, that bravery, that just growed. And especially these days, I mean, where things compared to the old days are so much the same, So I think it's about time to really think about doing things differently.
So can you talk a little bit about working on the Powerwolf record, Blessed and Possessed?
Oh my God. What I didn't mix that one, though. It was like it was Fredman who mixed it, and I recorded. I recorded the drums and I recorded the guitars, and but for example, Powerwolf is a band I never worked like creatively with. It was just like those guys are everything is so much done, and they have their like. They call it themselves their cliche format, of things that are allowed and not allowed. It's very narrow, and they So I could tell them like, hey, you could play. We changed a few notes or something, but that was, for example, not a band where I could say like, hey, couldn't we like, throw that part out and put other part in? But I also felt like there's no need for it because this is a band that has really found their formula, and it's not going to change. It's like AC/DC, and so that was more like the typical engineer technical work,
So the band is what the band is, and
that's what they want, and that's how it's.
Yeah.
And I also feel that's how it's supposed to be. And if you ask them, they would tell you like, this is Powerwolf, and there's a certain amount of different drum breaks that work, and there's a certain amount of guitar. It's just that's what we want. It's not an entirely serious band, They're kind of funny, or like, how do you call that? Kind of ironic, and they just want to be like a heavy metal, super over the top cliche band, and Steel Panther is not going to change. You know what I mean? It's like that's how it is.
Yeah. So when you work with that kind of band, where everything is predefined, do you have to shut off a part of your brain that wants to make suggestions, or do you just naturally fall into the role of the engineer?
I mean, I think I naturally fall there, but it's actually less exciting, or it's not boring, But for me, it's more exciting if I can work creatively. But but I'm not. I mean, sometimes on the other hand, sometimes you can't just come up with a groundbreaking vision all the time, and you can't, work in 120% all the time. So it's cool to do these things as well, and to just do a mastering for someone, which is like rather like totally technically more or less, and then go back to something where you really have to get into the songs and into the mood of the band,
Do you ever feel like you get creatively burned out?
Of course, yes. And on the other hand, like I just said, it's kind of mixed. So I'm also like writing with bands, Sometimes I'm also like writing songs, or not for the death metal bands though, but writing songs or co-writing songs and stuff. And you need both. You just sometimes it's just cool to edit drums for 3 days, And if you have that kind of mixture, it works, because the next week you'll have something where you have to work more creatively. And but sometimes it feels cool to just move things from left to right and don't think too much.
I kind of used to enjoy editing sometimes because I could listen to podcasts or listen to speakers.
Okay.
I really enjoyed while doing it at the same time.
I haven't done that though, but
it was just like an opportunity for my brain to take a vacation.
Yeah, right.
Which is good because, like you said, you can't always be delivering groundbreaking ideas. It's impossible.
And the problem is that, like in the metal world, and with the budgets we have, we don't have like a producer guy, and then you have one or more engineers, who do all the technical work, and the producer just shows up sometimes, with a fresh mind and fresh ideas, and tells you, hey, I want this more green or blue or whatever. You have to do both, and which is like 2 jobs actually. So it's cool to have those moments where you just like record or just edit, and then you have the other moments where it gets like more important to actually, understand the whole concept of the album, understand the whole concept of the song. So switching between rather technical work and more creative work is actually a good thing, I guess.
So how many days a week do you work?
I work 5 days a week. I try to work 5 days a week, and I used to work like all the time, and I've been doing this for...
So you try to work less days a week. So you try to work 5 down from 6 or 7, not 5 up from 3 or 4.
Exactly. I've been doing this like for, I think, 15 years now. And of course, like starting very, very small with local projects. And I mean, that's what you have to do in the beginning. You have to work your ass off, and work all the time to make a business like this grow and to make it, kind of successful. But I've come to a point where it was very important for me to be able to, I don't know, step back and get a different perspective, and you can't do that if you work all the time. If a production needs it, and it happens quite often that I work on a Saturday or Sunday, or that I do like that I work in the evening or at night. That happens, of course, if it's needed. But usually I just tell people, hey, I work from Monday to Friday, and I'm not working on the weekend. That's what I'm trying to do, and that helps me. Like after 15 years, especially, that helps me to stay creative, and But then, of course, if the project needs it, I'm there. And
so you won't turn down the work, but for your own sanity.
Yes,
you're trying to keep it more structured during the week.
Yes, and I mean, but also but perhaps I'm sure you know that as well. That if you keep on working and working and working, you get lost and you repeat yourself, and it's like it's
absolutely
just, it's not good, and you start making mistakes, or you ask yourself, what am I actually doing here? And so the two main things for me that are important is to have days off where I don't listen to music, where I play with my kids and do other stuff, or and that's one thing that is important. And the other thing that is important to me is that I don't do the same shit all the time, that I don't do death metal records all the time, that I do power metal albums and death metal albums and metalcore albums and everything, and even record local bands or interesting small bands that do like something else totally, if I just to stay fresh, because otherwise.
How do you attract clients that are not extreme metal? And the reason I ask this is because my background coming from metal, I know that it's hard to get into other genres once you're known for metal, because once metal bands know you, you get so many of them that it's hard to fit in other styles, and then getting started in other styles is equally as difficult. How do you go about finding clients in other styles?
I mean,
other genres?
I don't do like any bigger bands of other styles. It's all metal, but like in like doing metal only. I mean, if you have like Powerwolf and Aborted and Eskimo Callboy playing the same venue, like on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then it will be a completely different audience. So working like the metal scene is so diverse, it is different, to do like a modern metalcore thing compared to a death metal record. So that's one thing that is important, that you're not only doing like one thing because you're known for it. But what I do is like, if there's any local bands that I like, then I sometimes work with them, or sometimes you have like now for example there's a project of a singer that recorded here with his metal band, and he's doing another project. It's just two people, a drummer and him singing, and he's playing like 5, I don't know what it is, like distorted Hammonds and Rhodes and vintage synthesizers through a wall of guitar amps. And I just said, like, I have to do this.
That sounds like a cool idea.
I just thought, like, I don't even know what I really didn't understand it. I was like, they are singing through stomp boxes and shit, And I was like, I was standing at the show and I didn't get it, It was just like, what are you guys doing? But it's fucking awesome. And I think, I want to work with you, and I don't even know how to record that yet, but we'll figure it out. And I'm sure if I do that, we are working on like some songs right now, and like composing wise. And then if I finally record this, I'm sure I will get some new inspiration, some new ideas, even for perhaps a death metal production, And that is important, to not burn out.
I think that's great. And so did you, I realized that this is someone who you already worked with, other project.
Yeah.
But when you want to work with bands that are outside your normal type of band, do you approach them?
Difficult, yeah, because I usually, I agree, if you do metal and then you try to get in touch with a I don't know, an indie rock band or something, you always have that.
They think of you as the metal guy.
Exactly, yeah. So usually it really works. I don't know. If some of the guys has played in a band that has worked with me before, that's the typical way, because metal is just like a stigma. It's like,
For better or for worse.
Yeah,
it is.
right. But even in metal, there's sometimes bands, that don't want to work with me because I'm too modern or too extreme or too whatever, or but in the end it works. That's the most important thing. Yeah,
That's pretty funny. I'm laughing because I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I've got some questions here from the audience I'd like to ask you. Here's one from Diego Fernandez, which is, do you often quad track your rhythm guitars? And do you find that it's worthwhile for extreme metal to quad guitars?
It's hard to say, actually, because it's so much more work. And I'm doing albums where I just have two guitars.
God, it really is so much more work.
And then if people record their guitars here, it's a lot of money, and then or if they don't do it like at home and it's reamped later. And it's the cool thing about quad track guitars is that you have like an extra pair you can play with. So you do like a main guitar sound, and then you can say like, okay, what's missing, and then you can experiment and add something. On the other hand, for example, if I do hardcore productions, the advantage of only having two tracks, one left, one right, is that you still like have the impression of there's like two guys playing, and you can like spot them, even if it's just like one guy doubling it. But it feels like you don't have that wall of sound, like that Hollywood kind of thing. That's what I call it, where everything is everywhere, but you can still, you have. It feels more live. So I'm doing both, yeah, and I'm saying like it's if things get very, very technical, I usually just do two tracks because it's tighter, and if things are more like raw sounding, then like hardcore and punk stuff, I also do two tracks, and otherwise I try to do four just because it's comfortable for me. But it's shitloads of work, yeah.
It really is shitloads of work.
And then it depends on the guitar player. Excuse me. Yeah.
Well, yeah. If the guitar player is not great, then it's almost not worth even trying.
Exactly. So if people ask me, I very often tell them like, let's just start working. Let's see. And then usually after the first song, I can make a decision if that was going to work or not.
Yeah, because I mean, let's be honest. Like, lots of guitar players aren't good enough for you to realistically quad track them.
Yeah, and then it's a question if you really want to spend 5 days editing guitars or not.
Not. I prefer not to. So Anthony DiGiacomo is wondering, what kind of amps were used on the aborted records? Were the guitars double or quad tracked? It seems like this topic is coming up a lot.
Yes, I think that was it was a rectifier again for the main tracks, and then I think I used Dietzel standing right beside me. What is it called? D-moll, yeah, and for the other tracks. From what I remember, but I'm pretty bad at actually remembering this, and I think that's what I did on the Termination Redux EP, where they tracked the guitars themselves. I was just recording drums and vocals here, and then the Retrogore album we recorded everything here, and then because we wanted it to sound like pretty close to the EP and we liked it, I think we went back to the Kemper profiles I had done for the EP, so we could have like more or less the same sound. And and for the next record, I'm pretty sure we're gonna do something else. Don't know what it is.
Do you love the Kemper?
It's kind of, the Kemper was, because I'm still using amps. I've never been using any amp sims for high gain guitars. Other people do, and that's fine, and they have great results with it. I was never satisfied, and I preferred, I have a lot of amps, I have a room, I have cabs, and I know how to do it, so I set them up. But I think that one of the first guys pre-ordering the Kemper because it was so unbelievable. And I mean, everybody knows the Kemper amp, and it is great. And there might be a difference, but it's not worth talking about. You can do great records with a Kemper. And the thing is, though, that the more presets and templates you have for anything, but also for guitar recording, the more you have a tendency to repeat, just to say, it's easy to say like, I know this, I don't know, this angle profile works, so let's just go for it, instead of like you used to set up something new, even perhaps use the same amp and find a sound yourself. So that's the problem sometimes. That's why if we're recording guitars here,
I know exactly what you mean.
I don't want to. I mean, I know I have great sounds in my camper. I'm just using my own stuff there, and it's full with my own presets from a lot of records that I've done. But I always like pull out 3 or 4 amps and start again, and try to find something. Because everything's gonna sound the same otherwise.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So here's a question from Charles Elliott. How do you get that huge bass sound, and what's your preferred signal chain for bass?
Different each time. I'm not using amps or like real amps or cabs for bass, and except for if there's a bass player showing up like with a rig he likes, but that happens like not often. Bass players usually come here and say like, hey, I don't even have a bass, like make it, their guitar players talk to you about their cables, and about every fucking detail, and then bass players, are different. And but I usually also do like, I have like different tracks running, like that typical setup where you have a clean track for the low end, and compress it and try to get an undistorted low end, and then there's different pedals, but very typical stuff like it's standing right here. What is it called? Microtube's P7K from Dark Glass, or the different.
I was actually just about to ask you if you like the Dark Glass pedals.
I like it, and then there's a cool pedal from Tech 21, that Ampeg pedal. Don't remember
what
what
the Sans amp.
Not the normal Sans amp, but the Ampeg thing they do. VT bass. That's cool. Then there's a few different. I like Amplitude as well. There's a cool plugin called Bass Grinder, but it's always different. And very important is you need to track with a cool bass. If you have the right bass, you can use any of those pedals and you're gonna get a great grindy death metal tone with it. But if you have a bass, like especially with old strings, that is just, I don't know, if you distort it, it just sounds farty and fuzzy and shitty, You can take the best pedals in the world, so it's very, very important to choose the right bass. For guitars, it's not that important, It's the difference between, there's a difference, of course, but if you just take an ESP guitar with an EMG and then a Gibson Les Paul with passive pickups, there's differences, but it's not night and day. And with bass guitars, if you have a shitty DI signal, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna sound great.
Yeah, people don't seem to understand. With bass, it comes down to even strings. If your strings are a little too old, it drastically changes the tone. Like, bass is super sensitive, and it's also super important to get right.
Yes.
It's one of those elements that lots of newcomers tend to overlook, but it's also the place where their mixes tend to suffer the most.
Exactly. Yeah, to get like a decent, stable low end, but then also have a great sounding bass and make it like audible in the mix. That's like the most difficult part to get right. But I think it's the same thing with clean guitars. Like, for some reason, I don't know why, but if you record highly distorted guitars, it's like, I do care about which pickups you use and which guitar you use and stuff. But in the end, if you have something decent, I always prefer the guitar player to use the guitar he feels comfortable with. And it's not going to be a night and day difference on clean guitars and on bass, perhaps because they're not so distorted. It is, all the details matter. Yeah. And it's like, and even like bass strings matter, use steel strings.
Absolutely.
Use steel strings and don't use any nickel, what are they called, nickel plated or something. Use fresh strings and all that stuff, that is really, really, really important. And that is also the most problematic part when I mix stuff that is not recorded here, that I try to make sure I tell people, like, if you have 3 basses, record them all with fresh strings, send them to me before you start recording. I will tell you which one to choose, because it's frustrating because you can use 55 plugins and it's not going to work.
I've actually done shootouts of different bass strings just to prove that it makes a huge difference.
Pro Steel,
and it does. It really does.
D'Addario, Pro Steel, those are cool. I think
those are my favorite.
Yeah, and there's some
Pro
Warwick,
Steel all the way.
Some Warwick strings that are way cheaper. The red Warwick strings, they also sound very good, but they will die after 2 songs, like more or less. But they're also cool.
So will Pro Steels, in my experience. 2 songs is a lot. Like, in my experience, the Pro Steels go after 1. But that's why you need it. That's why you need an endorsement. So you can get them for cheap as hell. Because, God, they're expensive.
But it also depends on the player and the sweat and...
yes, that too.
But changing bass strings, dear people, makes sense. Yeah. If you want to have that dangle sound, yeah.
So here's a question from John Ganser, which is, the low end just hammers on the aborted albums. What do you find most challenging to overcome with this style of death metal besides low end?
Good question. To be honest, I mean, clarity, of course. Clarity is one thing, but that has more to do with the recording process, So clarity is more like how things are played, how the palm mutes are played and all that stuff. So if you have a good guitar player, that's going to work. And the aborted guys are great guitar players, and or you have to sit here beside the guitar player and watch their fingers and whip them hard and remind them to move their hand to the right spot for the palm mutes and stuff. That's how you get the clarity, not by choosing the right Kemper profile or choosing the right amp. So that's difficult here. Yeah,
this style of metal relies heavily on the playing. And the best sounding bands on recordings also sound great live in this genre.
And also, it's like I'm really trying. I don't know if people hear that, but I'm really trying to keep the drums as natural as possible, and that means first of all, I'm only using the samples that I'm recording at the same session with the same drummer. I mean, there's always an exception, but I'm not using any sample libraries or stuff. So I want to get the drum right in the room, get the miking right in the room, so everything is transparent and audible in the end. And you need to either have a great drummer who plays perfectly anyway, or you need to tell someone how to do things, and that helps a lot because you can get clarity by just triggering the shit out of everything. It's gonna sound very clear, but very boring as well, and so that is important. But it's the recording process. Choose the right cymbals, choose the right mics, choose.
So you don't sample replace very often. Am I understanding that correctly?
I'm using samples. I think samples on all of the extreme albums that I do, but I'm just using the samples that I'm recording in this session. So I before we start recording, I'll let the drummer give me 100 samples of the snare in different velocities, left hand, right hand, rim shots, all that stuff. I'm recording that with a lot of mics, and what I usually do is later, then I use the original track as much as I can do, but then I have like a preset in a sample player where I have the unprocessed samples, different velocities of the direct snare, of the overheads, of different room mics, just like having one of those VST instruments. And then I have 5 faders, so the original snare and others, and that blends, of course, perfectly. So you can say this part doesn't need anything. On the other part, I just want the original snare plus a lot of room sample only, and you can play with it. It's a lot of work to cut all those samples and to put them in there. That takes a lot of time, but that's how you, keep more of the original performance, yet making things sound punchy and modern.
Do you do this yourself, or do you have an assistant help you?
No, I have 2 other people working here, but I don't know. I still do this myself because then I know what I'm doing. I'd love to skip the process there, but I don't know. I handpick all the samples myself. Yeah, unfortunately.
You know what? It's very interesting that you do it this way, because one thing that we always show people how to do is with samples is how to create fake rooms, or how to create a room, just like a snare room, for instance. And you're doing the exact same thing. You're just doing it based off of the samples that you recorded right then and there.
Right. I end up like working the same way like other people who just have their original snare and then they open up some whatever Steven Slate or some kind of sample player, and then they try to combine those two and very often end up just using the faked snare. But if you do it that way, it's more work because you spend some hours on preparing all those samples. But the really cool thing is that it blends so well. So you can do a lot of automation there, and you are able to control the original room that you have. But if you just crank the room mics, you're gonna have way too much cymbal wash and shit there on a death metal record. So you perhaps just want to use the room samples of the snare. And so once you've gone through all that extra work, I think there's nothing else that beats it, because you always, making a different snare that's recorded somewhere else in a different room with different mics, tuned differently, like interact with your original snare. It can work, of course, but it's always kind of, or very often kind of alien sounding. So my experience is that people just like end up with 90% of the fake snare and nothing of the original snare, and machine gun like drums,
Makes sense. Okay, here's a question from Dinesh Vilayat, which is, he actually has a few questions.
Okay.
I'll start with the first one. For tremolo picked riffs, when the double bass drum and the bass guitar follow along, how do you control the low end? I'm asking this both from a mixing standpoint as well as a production standpoint. Do you ask the bass player to play at halftime relative to the guitarist? What do you do?
First of all, what is a tremolo picked riff? Like a fast riff or something? Or
yeah, it's the fast riffs where they're going as fast as possible with the right hand.
Okay, so I'm a big fan of playing as slowly as possible on the bass. If you don't need the grind, so if you don't really need to hear the bass on that part, like grinding, then it's way easier to mix to just go for a dang 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 instead of the because the low end needs some time to develop, and if the bass is not very prominent in the mix, I'm sure you know that situation where you just mix, you think like, oh, that part of the low end is perfect, and then comes the fast part, and you just think like, oh, the low end is gone. What happened? Did I just mute the bass? And then you realize, oh fuck, no, he's playing too fast, and there's no low end anymore. So I'm trying to make the bass player play as slowly as possible.
Makes sense. Here's question number 2 from him. Do you ever use reverb on the rhythm guitars? And if so, could you let us know why you use it?
I'm not using reverb on rhythm guitars like on let's say like normal parts or something. It's an effect somewhere. If you have, I think I did that on the aborted record as well. If you have parts that are supposed to be very, deep and atmospheric and stuff, then you want reverb everywhere. So, but that's more of an effect. I wouldn't, for this kind of metal, I wouldn't recommend using reverb on rhythm guitars.
Just asking to make a mess out of the mix.
Yeah, exactly. On the other hand, there might be some people doing this with great results. I don't know, but I don't do it because, like you said, it's going to end up with sounding very messy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So here's question number 3 from him. Do you process the snare in a blast beat differently than the snare in a slower part of the song? Same question goes for kick drum also. Are they laid out on separate tracks and processed differently?
No. In general, I'm very, very simple. I'm not using a lot of buses and different, effects change and stuff. I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible, using as little plugins as possible. That makes things usually easier, and you don't end up with, a million plugins where you don't even remember why you chose the first ones. And for blast beats and normal parts, if I use like I'm not doing any different. I usually like make the snare like by hand, like automation, louder on the blast beats. Just I don't know, 4 dB or something even. Try to make it come up. As soon as you get too much bleed from other instruments, you've gone too far, and then I'm trying to find on the samples I'm using. I'm trying to find the right velocity range for the samples. So typically, if like a kick or a snare is on 127 MIDI velocity, it's gonna be, I don't know, the snare on a blast beat is gonna be on 90 or something, or 80 on a blast beat, or it's gonna be on 110 or something on a double bass part. So that's so there is a difference. Yeah,
and that also depends on which samples you're using, because they all have different sweet spots, I guess, at different velocities.
Exactly, and that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm doing it myself. So I'm like, if I do those different velocities for the drums, like cutting the samples, the first thing I do is like I insert the sample player and I try it like on a normal part where you just have the full power hits, and then you try it on a blast beat and on a double bass part and stuff like that, and then you try to see if you found the right samples, or not, and if not, I go back, cutting out like different samples or going to a different velocity. So it's very important to make that like work from the beginning, and once all that work is done, like when you're mixing, like, all right, double bass is going to be 110 and blast beat is going to be 75, and go for it. And then it's not, that is easy.
All right, final question from Dinesh, and this is also going to be the final question. This one's about guitar tone.
Yes.
Dinesh says, I would like to know your thoughts on layering guitar tracks to make a composite single guitar tone. Is it something that's done for this genre? Could you share some of the things that you look for when layering guitars? What are the check boxes you tick off in your mind when you have reached a tone you like? Thanks, man. Well, I guess we already know that you do like to layer tones.
Yes,
you were talking about layering the HM2-ish kind of sound
to the rectifier
with
or something.
The rec and stuff. So maybe you could just elaborate a little bit more on that.
What I'm trying to do actually is I'm trying to get like the final sound from my first pair of guitars. I'm trying to get the best sound possible. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm trying to do, and that sometimes works. That you just you have the feeling that it's all there, but then usually during the process of recording the guitars, that's a cool thing, by the way, about also like actually recording the bands, that you can like split the decisions. Like you don't have to make all decisions on one day. So when I'm recording guitars, like with the first sound, then I try to figure out what's missing, if there's something missing. And then you might end up with saying like, okay, we need more low end, or we need more grind, or we need whatever. And then I'm usually trying to find a sound that is just like perhaps 20, 30, 40% of the final sound in the end, but a sound that is gonna bring in whatever's missing. That's what I'm doing. And then it helps to actually know that I've got this amp who usually has a lot of whatever, and that's gonna work with it. It's always like guesswork, and sometimes it works directly, sometimes you have to try harder. But that's what I'm doing, trying to get a main tone and then adding what's missing.
So like you said, you're trying to get it as finished as possible before you even get started.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I'm always trying to not do too much to guitar. So I'm like the question before, I'm not having like separate buses for blasts and like normal parts or something, or slow parts. And I'm trying not to. I'm usually just having, I don't know, 1 or 2 plugins on the guitars and just EQing a little later in the mix. But I'm really, really trying to get the final tone, like 90% of the final tone, by just recording and mixing the tracks that I have. Because especially on guitars, I believe as soon as you do more than a few dBs of EQ, and if you mangle them hard, you can do that with a bass drum, no problem, or with a snare drum. But with guitars, it's gonna sound like a dull guitar with 15 dB of highs, raped in, so to say, So I'm always trying to get.
It's very easy to ruin guitars.
And it's easy
too
to,
much EQ.
and it's easy to overlook because you get the right frequency response, and it feels right. It sounds like whatever you're looking for, but it's easy to miss the point that you're actually destroying something else. And so I believe that getting great metal guitar tones is, you don't need shitloads of plugins and processing for it. Actually, if you choose the right tools.
I totally agree with you. Well, Kristian, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been
Thank you very much for having me, man.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm glad that we finally got to do this after going back and forth for so long.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Yeah, well, have a great evening, and hope we can do this again soon sometime.
Hopefully. And thanks everyone for listening, and greetings from Germany. Bye-bye.
The Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast is brought to you by Drumforge. Drumforge is a forward-thinking developer of audio tools and software for musicians and producers alike, founded on the idea that great drum sound should be obtainable for everyone. We focus on your originality. Drumforge, it's your sound. Go to drumforge.com for more info. To ask us questions, make suggestions, and interact, visit nailthemix.com/podcast and subscribe today.